Hey all you heroes and champions, crows, pirates, and inquisitors. Welcome to the Dragon Age Lorecast. I'm Shelby.
And I'm Austin.
And we are so excited to bring you this podcast. Every episode we'll be talking about a different topic in the Dragon Age universe. From the Maker to Lyrium to Aravels, we will cover it all. There will be spoilers. And always remember, swooping is bad.
Hey Shelby.
Hey Austin.
You ready to talk about some Dragon Age?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess we'll do this another day.
I'm just kidding. I just wanted to know what your reaction would be if I actually said no to that.
Oh. So, how's your playing of Dragon Age going?
Well, I have to confess something.
Yes.
And that is that I have a playthrough open in every single one of the games right now.
That surprises me zero. Are we really counting your Dragon Age 2 playthrough? You haven't touched that one in months.
Actually, no. I went back to it last week.
Oh, okay.
And I'm trying to make it through Mass Effect 1 for the first time. So...
yeah, I have no hopes of you doing that.
I'm trying. I will finish it. I will. I just don't understand what's happening.
You're almost done.
You say that, but then I still have like 5 more planets or whatever.
You have 3 more planets, if that.
Okay, well, I'm just confused. But back to Dragon Age. Yeah, so I have 3.
Yes.
I have 3 playthroughs happening right now, but I'm focusing on 4, technically 4, because I'm in Awakening as well. So that's the one I'm focusing on.
That's fine. That's fine.
Are you rolling your eyes at me?
No.
So anyway, those are my playthroughs.
Yeah.
How are yours going? You haven't.
I don't have a playthrough.
Touched it because you've been playing Destiny.
Yes, I have been playing Destiny. If you want to join us on Destiny, you can join the Robots Radio Discord found in the description below. We have a Destiny clan going on. If you want to join that.
Okay, corny. Corny.
All right. So today we are continuing our Countries of Thedas theme, and we started last week with Teventer, the oldest human nation. And so today we are moving on with another nation that is very well known, has a lot of history to it, a lot of history surrounding the Chantry and everything about that. So Shelby, what country are we talking about this week?
Today we are talking about Orlais.
Yeah.
Everybody's favorite French country in Thedas.
Yes. I don't even think French politics are as complicated as Orlais politics.
Well, I'm not French, so I wouldn't know.
Yeah, I wouldn't know either, but...
yeah, so we're talking about Orlais. I know you're super excited because you hate Orlais.
I don't hate Orlais. I just have zero interest. And my biggest question is what's the deal with the mask? I don't get it. I don't understand it. I don't know what's going on.
That's fair. I don't know either.
Okay. Well, let's see if we dive in here, see if we can find anything out.
Okay. Well, I just have a few, before we go to the ancient history, I just have a few little fun facts about Orlais.
All right.
Capital of Orlais is Valréaux, obviously. It is an absolute monarchy. This is not, like Queen Elizabeth, who is, in power in name only. No. The Emperor, Empress of Orlais is that's where the buck stops with them. Unless someone outmaneuvers them in the game. But really, the Emperor or the Empress is where the power lies. So they are an absolute monarchy. Supposedly, Orlais is the largest and most powerful nation in Thedas currently. Clearly, that has not always been the case in the past. In the past, Tevinter basically covered the entire continent. So that's definitely in flux, something that has changed. And I think it's possible that we could see the fall of Orlais soon, depending on, your actions in the games. Who knows?
Definitely.
So the ruler of Orlais currently is conditional. It can be Empress Celine Valmont, or it can be Emperor Gaspard, or it can be Emperor Gaspard, who is a puppet emperor commanded by Briala. Ambassador Briala, I should say. So those are the three options for the rulers of Orlais. And obviously that depends on your choices that you made in Inquisition. So those are just a few little facts I have about modern Orlais.
So where does Orlais come from? Like what groups do they arise out of? Because there's no Orlesian Empire when Andraste comes in with her.
That's true.
Places. So where do they come from?
Okay, let's get into it, because that question has a really big answer. So to answer that question, we have to go back to the ancient history, which is what I was planning on talking about anyway. And so we go so far back that we're talking about tribes, right? Like all of Thedas is, the humans in Thedas are tribal communities right now. So you have, like we talked about last week in Tevinter, you have these 4 tribal kingdom groups of humans in Tevinter that eventually merge into one society, into the Tevinter Imperium. Similarly, in Fereldan, we've talked about this before, I think in our Andraste episode, you have the Alamari tribes who all end up uniting under Mafrath and Andraste. And then you have a few other tribes that kind of don't unite, and they become what we know as the Avar in, the mountains. So in Orlais, you have 2 different groups of tribes. You have the Ingers tribes. They settled in northern Orlais and southern Tevinter. And they were largely decentralized and very nomadic. So that means they were pretty easily defeated by the Tevinter tribe of the Nerominians. So that's one group that makes up Orlais. But the other, bigger, more significant, more of a historical and cultural impact is the Syrian tribe. So the Syrian is made up of a bunch of different tribes, really tribes that have their own distinct culture and heritage, but they're aware of each other. Actually, honestly, you could probably even compare it to the Dalish now. So that's the Syrian. If you remember, Andraste's mother she came from a Syrian tribe, and she married Andraste's dad, Eldorath, I think is his name. So there is some crossover between the Alamari and the Syrian and all of these other tribes. So that's an important background. But to get to the point where they're unified into what we know of as Orlais, obviously we've already talked about Andraste and her, marches to Tevinter with Mafrath and Shartan. We've talked about this. But when she dies in Tevinter, when she's martyred, Mafrath comes back, and he's now got all this land that they've conquered. In Fereldan, in Orlais, in Tevinter, in Navarra, in all of these in the Free Marches, in all of these places, they've got all this land. And Mafrath is still seen as a hero because the people don't know that he's the one that betrayed Andraste to Tevinter. So what he does is he splits up these lands to be ruled by his sons, or by their sons. And so the land that is now Orlais, he gave to his son, who is named Isarath. And Isarath he gets married to a woman named Jeshavis. And she's actually referred to as the mother of Orlais. So they get married. And Isarath, is really the one that unites all of these Syrian tribes into one big tribe. And so they pretty much take over the majority of the land that we know of as Orlais. And so Mafrath, he's ruling over most of Fereldan. The other sons are ruling over other places. Well, basically, when it comes out that Andraste was betrayed by Mafrath, not all of the sons can hold on to all of their lands. Isarath and Jeshavis, they do hold on to their land. They continue to hold on to the lands of Orlais. But Isarath's brother, his name was Verald. He was ruling in what's now Navarra. He lost that land and fled to Orlais. And so he sought refuge with his brother and sister-in-law. And what actually ends up happening is a little bit after this grand unification of all of these Syrian tribes, Jeshavis and Verald make a move against Isarath to take these lands from him. So what happens is Jeshavis manipulates Verald into killing his own brother and taking control of these lands. And then she marries Verald after he has just killed her husband. So when Isarath was dead, she gets rid of all of the Alamari that have come into the Syrian lands after Mafrath's betrayal becomes public. She kills all of these people, and then the very last person that she kills is her new husband, Verald. And she takes control of all of the Syrian tribes. And so she is now the one that is leading this land that will then become Orlais. So that's kind of what happens to combine these tribes.
It's very interesting. So to me, this whole thing speaks of like the game or politics or Orlais is very much a thing from the very beginning.
Yes, I have two thoughts. Number one, this is like the first instance of the game being played. And I think a lot of Orlesians view it that way. They see her as the person who begins the game. And also, actually, I have three thoughts. Second thought is that this gives me really big Jacob and Esau vibes from the Bible. Anyway, number three, my third thought is that not only is the game so tied to Orlesian culture, but so is this rivalry with Fereldans. Like, it goes so deep, back to the very beginning. This rivalry with Fereldans, even before Fereldans was Fereldans, when it was the Alamari, even before Orlais was Orlais, when it was the Syrian. So I think these two things, that the rivalry with Fereldans and the game, are these two mainstays of Orlesian culture that go back to the very beginning.
And for any of our listeners who may not know, the game is what is referred to as the long political maneuvers or complex political system that exists in Orlais. So all the nobles and everything are said to be playing the game.
Well, not even the nobles, like any Orlesian plays the game. I mean, Brialla plays the game, right? To get ahead. Brialla's parents play the game to make sure that she gets ahead in life. So I definitely don't think it's just restricted to the nobles. I think it's something that really is in every aspect of Orlesian culture, whether or not they even realize it.
All right, so important things are about to happen in Orlais in the ancient age.
Yes.
Very important things that are coming, because we've got to, we've got the establishment of this empire coming. So let's jump back in.
Yeah, so Jeshavis goes on to rule the Syrian tribes for 42 years. I feel like that's a really significant amount of time. So you can really look at her as the first ruler of Orlais. The Orlesians refer to her as the mother of Orlais, even though she's not technically the first official emperor or empress. But she's very much the first ruler because she is the one that rules over this united people, because Isarath never really has that opportunity to rule. But eventually, I'm not sure whether it's her death or whether she's overthrown, but eventually she is no longer the ruler. And by -10, -11 ancient, so like 10 years before the Chantry is officially founded, the cult of Andraste's maker is spreading very quickly, vastly over southern Thedas. And the first temple is built to the maker in Val Royeaux. So it's beginning construction around this time, about 10 years before the first age, before the divine age. So Cordelis Draken has become the king, and he is a fervent, devoted disciple of the maker. And he is also proving himself to be an accomplished general and a beloved leader of the people. And by -3 ancient, he is crowned emperor. So his reign, he does so much for Orlais. He's crowned emperor, obviously, but he also is instrumental in the official founding of the Chantry. He appoints the first divine. He makes the Chantry, or the worship of the Maker, the official religion of Orlais. He is fighting in the Second Blight, leading the fight against the Darkspawn. He's expanding the Orlesian lands and just doing all kinds of stuff. And so he is really seen, I think, as Orlais' best leader.
I think when you go into, maybe not Orlais, but when you get into the Exalted Plains, the Emerald Graves, the Western Approach, you start seeing things named after Draken, like areas.
Yeah, you do. And there are statues, and I think there's some like idle ambient conversation that happens in the background. I think maybe when you're in the Emprise du Lion, where somebody's basically saying like, we're going to restore Orlais to the glory of Draken, or something like that. I can't remember when or where it happens, but something generally like that happens in Inquisition. So yeah, I think he's really seen as like the best of the emperors, for sure. So we're in the Second Blight, which is about halfway through the Divine Age. And he dies. Emperor Draken dies. And so by this time, the Orlesian Empire had expanded into the Androfels, into the majority of the Free Marches, at least the western side, and like gone all the way westward as far as they can. And the Androfels had pledged their allegiance to Orlais, so they joined the Empire because of how taken they are with Draken, all this stuff, whatever. Well, when he dies, his son, Cordelius II, he becomes the emperor, and he is just not as successful as his father. He's not the military leader. His father was. He's not beloved. He's just not impressive, right? Which is normally how these things happen with hereditary monarchies. But eventually the Androfels would declare their independence in 165 Divine. So like they're not even really part of the Orlesian Empire for more than 50 years. It's not long at all. But we're going to skip ahead a little bit because, you know, they move up and down. It's kind of like a roller coaster. Like you've got good leaders, you've got bad leaders, you've got wars, you've got blights, you've got good things and bad things, and that's just kind of the way it goes. But at the beginning of the Glory Age, there were lots of skirmishes and fights and tension with the elves in the Dales. And in 2.9 Glory, the elves attacked Red Crossing, which is a town in Orlais. And pretty soon they end up taking Red Crossing and Montsimard, and they even are able to sack Valroyo. So this is a really significant victory for the elves of the Dales, and this is what really prompts the Exalted March, and that is called by Divine Renata the First. And so elves had huge successes in taking all of these Orlesian cities, but ultimately Halamshral, their capital, would be conquered. And the elves were completely crushed by 210 Glory, or 220 Glory, I'm sorry. So that's like a 11-year war. And then the Dales were then annexed and became part of the Orlesian Empire. Alienages were created for the elves that submitted to the Orlesian rule, and the elves that did not submit to Orlais then became the nomadic Dalish tribes. So I think this is a really important part of Orlesian history, because it's a significant piece of land. Number one, it's a big chunk of their country, and number two, it really is a moment where officially they kind of begin to turn away from some of the things that Andraste, I think, would have wanted, such as, a homeland for the elves. Like, that was something that she wanted. And so this is really one of the big, big, big ways that they begin to defy Andraste even.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting. You see the moment of, like, yes, they're a budding empire up to this, but I think it's not really until this Exalted March happens that we see the empire of Orlais.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, because the next thing that they do, is they then call more exalted marches. They call an exalted march to venture out of Starkhaven, and then they finish the Grand Cathedral in Valroyo, and then they start moving into other areas. They occupy Navarra from 325 towers until 365 towers. That's 40 years. That's a long time. And then in the Black Age, they start pushing into Fereldan. So I think you're right. From the moment that they take the Dales from the elves, that's when, like, the colonization starts ramping up. Like, they start going into all of these places, these other places that they did not necessarily have a claim to, and they start taking them. And I think those roots are there beforehand. I don't want to make it seem like, Orlais is just this, innocent little empire before they take the Dales. No, I don't think that's true. I think the roots for what Orlais became are there from the beginning. But I think that the Exalted March on the Dales is when things begin to ramp up and change, and maybe even become more extreme.
I mean, and it comes to you in a conversation with Varric that you have in Inquisition, and you ask about the Arishok from DA2. Varric basically says that, like, the Qunari back in Parvalin basically denounced the Arishok, and he says they were afraid that they would raise an exalted march on Parvalin. So, like, it's a point of, like, even a country that is strong and I would consider a very formidable like military force, especially since they've kept Tevinter on their heels for decades, if not centuries, and they even fear this exalted march. So, like, Orlais with these has kind of sowed this sense of, like, fear, like, okay, like, yeah, you guys have your independence and everything, but remember, we can still we hold the chantry.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Well, I think my next point is moving into their conquering of Ferelden and even moving into the exalted marches against the Kunari. So I think before we get into that, now would be probably a good time to take a little break.
Yeah, let's do that. Hey, all right, welcome back. So we're going to start with a little change in our structure of our episodes, and we're going to have a little middle section where we just kind of like talk about what's going on with the podcast and other things like that. So as always, if you want to support us in our podcast, one of the best ways is to just leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Let us know what you like. That really helps us. So yeah, if you give us a review, we will potentially read it out on the show. And so, Shelby, do you want to maybe read a review for today?
Sure, I can do this one.
Yeah.
Okay, so this review is from Cornbox, 3 X's. Thank you, Cornbox. This says, we are fun, knowledgeable, and intelligent. Thank you. Cornbox says, so excited to see such a great new podcast for Dragon Age. I'm a super fan, and these folks really know their stuff. It's such a fun podcast, and they go into such great detail about all the things that I want to hear about. One of the things I really hate about podcasts is all the extra stuff that people talk about when trying to be personable, but these two really pull off the personality without any of the clutter. It's straightforward, fun to listen to, and easily one of my new favorite podcasts. Thanks, y'all, and keep them coming. Dareth Shiral. Thank you, Cornbox. It also really annoys me when podcasts are talking all the time about not things on topic. So...
I don't really care what people have for breakfast on a podcast about video games.
Right. Right.
Thank you. And of course, like the reviews, they help the podcast. So please review. All right. As always, you can reach to us on Twitter at DA Lorecast. You could also join in the description. You'll find links for the Robots Radio Discord. Both Shelby and I are on there as Teacup92 and SheCup94. You can reach out to there. There's a Dragon Age channel. Check us out there.
Yeah.
And also, if you're curious about our playthroughs, we do have a Twitch channel. It is the same as Teacup92 on Twitch. And just you can check out playthroughs. We stream occasionally. We'll try to start posting on Twitter when we do stream our playthroughs and stuff like that. All right, Shelby, you ready to get in? So where do we go from a point of we have this Orlais, this kind of budding empire, to this point of like true like imperial force that's kind of conquering all of Thedas, but we're not introduced in Dragon Age into a world where Orlais rules all of Thedas. We're in these other countries and there's history there. So like what happens? Like what stops Orlais? What's the story there?
Yeah, well, I think we do get glimpses, right, of what it looks like when Orlais ruled not everything, but a lot of Thedas. In Origins, because the whole game you're fighting against Loghain, right? Like he's not the big bad because he's not the archdemon, but like if there was like a second big bad, like a less big bad, I don't know. Anyway, it would be Loghain. And he is always talking about Orlais because he's a veteran of the war with Orlais. He was a participant in the overthrowing of the Fereldan rebellion. So like that's always on his mind and he talks about it all the time. So we get all these glimpses into what it was like when Orlais did rule Fereldan. And in the Black Age, 480 Black is when Orlais first conquers. It's their first venture to conquer Fereldan. It's not the first time they actually conquered Fereldan because they did not succeed. But basically what they wanted to do in the Black Age is that they wanted to take the port of High Ever, which would then, they would be able to take the sea, the northern sea of Fereldan. But the fortresses of Fereldan held out a lot longer than the Orlesians were expecting to, and winter in the mountains left a lot of the Orlesian forces unsupplied. They couldn't get their supplies. So by the spring of 484 Black, most of the Orlesian troops had been pulled out or captured or killed. So their first excursion back into Fereldan did not succeed. But this really starts like the process of them going into Fereldan. And as we know of, the most recent was before Merrick was king. And that lasted for, I think, 20 some odd years. And Merrick's mom, the rebel queen, she was basically orchestrating this rebellion for years and years and years and years. And she dies, and Merrick meets Logain in his escape, and they come back and lead the rebellion after she dies. And those two, along with Rowan, Merrick's intended, his bride, they are the ones that really lead this rebellion to victory. So we see all of that in the book, The Stolen Throne, which is a really good book. I really like that one. But that's a big part of Orlesian history, because it goes back into, like we were saying, like this fight with Fereldan. It's not just it's not just Orlesians making fun of Fereldans for smelling like dogs or having, bad weather and bad style or bad food. It's totally like a conflict of identity. They value totally different things in their society, in their culture. And I think that really does drive a lot of the conflict there.
I think it's an important thing to remember when you're talking about any kind of like group like that. Even Europe, you can't make a general statement about like European culture, because
Right.
If you told the French and the English they were the same,
you would be murdered.
Or even Germans and Italians, or any of these groups, they have such distinct identities. And I think that we can safely say Thedas is very much modeled off of a Europe model of these countries that have shared borders and other things. I know you think Tevinter is modeled after America, but
I'm just saying.
But there's
But I think, no, you're right. They did say that France is the inspiration for Orlais, obviously. But the comparison doesn't fully combine, or it's not a full comparison, because it's not one-to-one, because you have the inspiration, the divine, the Pope is obviously the inspiration for that. So anyway, yes, you're right, but it's not a one-to-one comparison.
Okay. It's just a lot to deal with. You have these competing ideals of, culture. I mean, even in our Elven history episode, we talked about a difference of ideals between the city elves of Orlais versus the city elves of Fereldan, and what they talk about. And
True.
So even in these other groups that aren't humans, you still have these big differences between Orlesian city elves and Fereldan city elves.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's a divide that runs really deep.
But
I want to...
I was just going to say, Fereldan isn't the only people that Orlais attempts to conquer.
That's true. That is true. And we're going to skip ahead a couple of centuries to the Storm Age. Because this is when Orlais tries to conquer the Qunari. The Qun has really made its way into Thedas by this point. And I think Tevinter really sees the brunt of this, and maybe the Free Marches, but mostly Tevinter. But the Qunari Wars, as they're called, the Divine of the Storm Age, during 725, 752, and 784, the Divine calls 3 exalted marches against the Qunari. So this is like the majority of this age, the Storm Age. And I'm sure that it was not named by that divine who named that age. I'm sure that she had no idea that war was coming, but I think it's a very apt name for this time, because as we know, war is violent, but war is not fun. So during the wars, during these exalted marches, Orlais managed to steal the Tome of Kozlun, which is what Isabella steals from the Kunari, which is like their most holy relic. It's like their Bible. So in 744 Storm, the newly crowned emperor of the Orlesian Empire, Emperor Freyin, allowed women to become knights after witnessing the death of Sir Aveline, Knight of Orlais. So this happens at the same time that the Kunari occupation of Kirkwall was lifted by an Orlesian chevalier. So all of this stuff is kind of happening at the same time. And the war with the Kunari finally ends in 799 Storm Age. And at that time, again, all these things are happening at the same time. Emperor Etienne I has 2 twin boys. So that happens at the same time the war is declared over. And so the divine of that time names the next age the Blessed Age, or the Blessed Age. So all of these things kind of happen at the same time. It's kind of a whirlwind, even though it's a 100-year span. But I think that's kind of how it happens when, you're in the middle of a war. So Orlais tries to conquer the Kunari. They try to conquer Parvalin. They retake Kirkwall, but their exalted marches to conquer the Kunari does not succeed at all. They do conquer Fereldan, like that's just a fact. Obviously, Fereldan rebels, but they don't have success with the Kunari other than retaking Kirkwall.
Do you think the exalted marches are intended to be like a 1-for-1 to the Crusades?
Probably. I mean,
I just think it's interesting because
Crusades.
The first exalted march is called by a divine, not the emperor.
Well, I think all exalted marches are called by
the divine. And so I think
that's why it's an exalted march.
Right, and so I would just think that like that's, having studied history and like Crusades of whatever that was, the Middle Ages, that's just a point of like they are religious and holy wars that have these ulterior political motives into them. And so I was just curious if you thought that was BioWare's intention to kind of make that comparison.
I have no idea what BioWare's intentions are with anything, but I do think there are similarities there.
So we have the Blessed Age.
Yes. Okay, so the Blessed Age is the age right before the Dragon Age. So we're like on the cusp of where we're at in the games currently. We're about like a decade and a half out. So in 824 Blessed, the Mad Emperor Reveal invaded Fereldan again. So by 844, which is 20 years later, they were occupying the majority of the country. So Fereldan is like totally engaged, or Orlais is totally engaged with this war with Fereldan, which gives other countries the opportunity to strike back at Orlais, specifically Navarra. And the Pentagasts take revenge on Orlais. They had really been waiting it out since 797 Storm Age, the previous age, which is about 30 years. When Emperor Etienne basically divorced his wife of 15 years, Princess Soteria Pentagast, to marry his mistress. Obviously, the Pentagast family, yes, the Pentagast of Cassandra Pentagast, they are very unhappy with this divorce. So while most of the Orlesian army was still like in Ferelden fighting, the Pentaghasts, Navarra declares war against Orlais, and they take several cities, especially in that north section. And the Orlesians did eventually rally a defense, but it really could never be a full defense or retaliation against Navarra because so many troops were in Ferelden. So a lot of cities fell during this time, and the city of Perendale was one of them. And Navarra has claimed that city ever since. So, yeah. So I think this is like one of the times where people see that Orlais is really not the empire it once was. Like, yeah, they're fighting Ferelden, they've taken Ferelden, but at the same time, they can't hold their borders elsewhere. At the same time, they have all these other countries that are looking to stab them in the back, basically, that are looking to make moves wherever they can. Which, again, that's the game, right? They kind of put it on themselves, but, yeah, I mean, I think this is one really big moment where people see through this Orlesian facade of power and prestige and might.
And I think that you see that this kind of pattern in history all the time. So if you take the American Revolution beforehand, leading up to that, there was a bunch of bitterness between England and France and even Spain at some point in this. And so England engages in a war with the American colonies, and France is just kind of like, okay, well, let's get in on this because we can benefit from this. It's interesting. It's a little different because Navarra is just kind of like, okay, let's just declare war instead of just being like, okay, well, let's move in with Ferelden to see if we can together push them back. But I would imagine that this kind of attack on Orlais was a rallying call even in Ferelden to say like, hey, these people can be beat.
Yeah, I would imagine so because it's in 896 blessed that Merrick Theron finally takes over the Ferelden throne, and they finally oust all of the Orlesians after his mother's assassination and after he kills the Orlesian king of Ferelden, Megrin. So it's not until 9-2 Dragon, though, which is 6 years later, that Orlais finally kind of cedes Ferelden back to Merrick and the Fereldans and says, okay, we're done. We're done with this. We're not going to keep fighting you.
Right. And I think that we will discuss more of the Orlais Ferelden War in our episode on Ferelden. But if you do want more information, you can always read the book, The Stolen Throne.
Yeah, which is a really good book. I say that every episode. I'm sorry, it's like my catchphrase, but it is a good book.
But Ferelden lovers, don't worry. We will give Merrick and Logain their due and their story that they deserve.
And Rowan.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll get there. So we are officially in the Dragon Age. So in 920 Dragon, Celine Valmont outmaneuvers her cousin Gaspard de Chalon to become empress. So Gaspard is like the next one in line. Like the throne should have gone to him, but Celine basically goes to their little council guys that you can meet in the Winter Palace, and she basically makes a compelling argument that she should be the one ruling Orlais, and they agree with her and give her the throne instead of Gaspard. So obviously he's pissed off. Like, I think the games kind of present him as like this guy who almost doesn't even really have a claim to the throne, which is not true. He totally does. So anyway, their whole their whole conflict happens in Inquisition, but I skipped over a little bit. Apparently, in the years leading up to the Mage Templar War, many Orlesian nobles had begun to plot to reconquer Ferelden after the Fifth Blight. After the Blight, when Ferelden was like really weak, or when they believed Ferelden was weak, which goes against Empress Celine's wishes. She wants to keep the peace. She wants to bring people under control, which we see in Asunder, Masked Empire, in the note she leaves for Kaelin, or the note she sends to Kaelin. If you've played that DLC, Return to Ostagar and Origins. So that's another thing that really, I think, makes some of the nobles turn toward Gaspard, and that's how he gets more of a following, in addition, obviously, to the Chevalier.
I think that, yeah. I also think that it's important, like, and we'll talk more about this in the Ferelden episode, but understanding this conflict really gives more of light to why Loghain acts the way he does in the beginning of Origins. I'm not excusing what he does, because I don't think it was the right thing to do, but he would consider Kaelin talking with Celine, or even considering help from the Orlesians, the ultimate betrayal.
Right, it's anathema to him, because he fought in the war. Like, he saw the atrocities they committed, and I get that. But also, a blight is so much worse than any kind of war you can fight with another country. So, anyway, that's my Orlesian history lesson. I was just gonna
say, and obviously, what's called the War of the Lions between Gaspard and
yes.
Celine ends with the help and influence of the Inquisition.
Yes.
And how it ends is entirely dependent on you, the player, in Inquisition. And there are other side quests. You can do the main quest that lets you go to the Winter Palace and negotiate the end, but you could also go to the Exalted Plains and the Emerald Graves to assist in this war. And assist the fighters of this war in more of a ground level than the big political thing.
Yeah.
So I think I still haven't gotten my question answered. What is the deal with the mask? So what is this? What does it mean to be Orlesian?
To be Orlesian and wear a mask? Like,
well,
what do you
mean?
mean?
More about their...
Which question?
Well, I want to know what the deal with the mask is. But
Okay. Let me get into the masks. So, I don't know why they wear masks, but their masks are symbols. They're always worn in the style that is according to your family, or the family that you serve if you're an elf. So, like, all of the Valmont family are all going to wear a similar mask. Obviously, the ones that, like, Celine wears is going to be way more fancier than the ones that her elven servants are going to wear, but it's like a hereditary family thing. So it not only is something that they do for the look of it, it's also something they do to show off their status and their family name, and it's something that they also do to be able to outmaneuver in the game. So if you're, you can hide your identity a little bit more if nobody knows what the top half of your face looks like.
Right.
So I think that's part of it. I don't know if that really answers your question about why they wear masks, but those are some of the reasons. I just wanted to talk about their culture a little bit, because obviously they are insane about luxury and extravagance and like all of these ridiculous fashions. Like, that's a huge part of their culture. And it really does go back to Emperor Draken the First, because that's something he was really passionate about. He loved fashion. And so this has been part of Orlesian culture for, forever, since the beginning. And I think that's another really important thing to note.
Yeah. And so what more, I think more things we can do that we hear a lot in the games is the bards of Orlais. So why don't we go a little in like who they are and their role? And you can learn a little if you talk to Liliana in Origins or things you can learn, or Josephine, who was also a bard. You can learn more about them. But
yeah,
what do we know?
Yeah, well, bards often entertain nobles in their courts, in addition to being trained assassins, or saboteurs or spies. So nobles welcome bards with the full knowledge that anybody could be a spy for somebody else. And like, it's kind of a thrill to them, like, oh yes, we're gonna outwit this person, we're gonna outsmart them, we're gonna beat so and so noble down the road, whatever. And like that's such a huge part of the game. And I really think that like the nobles, they do play the game, but they also use the bards as like pawns in the game. They use the bards to do the dirty work that they don't want to do. So it's almost like you're playing human chess, right? Like you're using other people to murder other people so that you don't have to, all while orchestrating all of this political behind the scenes stuff. So yeah, I don't know. They bug me. It annoys me.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can tell. But just to go into the game a little bit, the game officially refers to this perpetual competition for influence and esteem between the nobles. So it is between the nobles, even though other people, like we talked about earlier, play the game. Everyone in Orlais is subject to their peers' manipulation, regardless of whether or not you're born of noble birth. And I think a lot of people who are not born of noble birth are trying to play the game so that they can become a noble. Because there is this really deep classism in Orlais. Everything is about the nobility. We rarely ever hear about someone who's from Orlais that's not a noble. So yeah, the goals of the game, they basically want to gain prestige, reputation, power, patronage, and the rules are as simple as anything goes.
Right. I think it's interesting if we look at the game and like, because our real opportunity to like engage with the game on like a player level is an Inquisition with the Winter Palace.
Yeah,
Wicked Eyes, Wicked Hearts is the name of the quest. And it's interesting how I kind of have fun with it a little bit, even though I'm not the biggest fan of that quest. I enjoy the saying one thing but meaning another. The wordplay that exists and like how you get court approval in there. I enjoy that. Is intriguing to me because it takes a like, okay, I'm just going to say it's turning things on like at answering questions with questions, and like it's like who's wittier.
Yeah, that annoys
I know.
me. Like I can't.
You just want you're the kind of person who you want everyone to be like, okay, just say what you mean, just say it.
Yeah, I would be a Fereldan. I would be a Fereldan. 100%.
And I think that's a good point of like differences of Fereldan and Orlais in that. And we see this in the games because when we go to like the lands meet in Origins, like everyone's very direct. Like, and the things you say to Loghain to accuse him are very direct. Like very, you did this, you did this, you did this. And Loghain is very direct in his responses and how he responds to you. Whereas in Orlais, it's all of this kind of circular arguments and everything, like saying your point, and like that's part of the enticing thing of the game is knowing what's going on and behind the thing. And like if you don't, then you're not a part of the game. And I think that's one of the real big tensions, at least for me, because Fereldans see Orlesians as liars, manipulators, and they are in a lot of way. But to an Orlesian, that's the game. And I think Vivian even says that to Cassandra, who is like just disgusted by the game and hates everything. And Vivian's just like, that's the game, love, and things like that. And that's
nice accent.
Sorry. So that's a tension of like,
that's the game.
The Orlesians are like, we're being us, like, and on turn the Orlesians view the Fereldans as simpletons and not intelligence, where it's just a difference. One values direct thing, and the other values this complicated and vast system of how you do politics.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So yeah, let's get some notable Orlesians.
Yes. So, I mean, there's a lot of Orlesians that we meet throughout these 3 games and their DLCs and the books and comics, but a few important ones that I think are personally important or significant. Sir Aveline, not Aveline Valen, but Sir Aveline is the first female chevalier. And then, of course, there is Aveline Valen, who is the companion to Hawk. There is Briala, Ambassador Briala, if you will, Celine's spymaster and potential lover. There is Warden Commander Clarel of Orlais. There is Empress Celine. There is Grand Enchanter Fiona, also known as Alistair's mom. There's Floriane de Chalon. There's Gaspard de Chalon, also could be potentially Emperor Gaspard. There is Divine Justinia V, Catriel, Cordelis Draken, Liliana, Megrin, Michelle de Chavannes, Knight Captain Evangeline from the book Asunder, and Jeshavis, mother of Orlais.
And Duke Prosper.
Yes. You sound very offended that I left him off my list.
No, I just remember because he's a very like stereotypical Orlesian.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
But I think that if we come in like Liliana is not an Orlesian noble.
She's not a noble. She doesn't consider herself Orlesian at all. She considers herself Fereldan, even though she grew up in Orlais and is a trained Orlesian bard and has an Orlesian accent. She considers herself Fereldan, and she says that in Origins. So, I was conflicted about putting her on the list.
Okay. All right. Do you have any last closing thoughts about Orlais?
My last closing thoughts about Orlais. Orlais is not a place I am super interested in. And so I hope we don't go there in Dragon Age 4. I hope we go somewhere new. And I would not be sad if Orlais fell. I don't think that would happen just because of the Chantry. But, I mean, we could see the Chantry fall. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Orlais annoys me. Orlesians annoy me. I think they're prissy.
I think it's an important, yes, Orlais annoys me, but you can't argue their importance in the structure of Thedas. Especially because of the Chantry, which you're not doing that. But I think, it's a point, in the alternate timeline that you go to in Inquisition, part of what leads to Carophius winning is he conquers Orlais.
That's true.
Because then there's not a force to stand against him.
That's true.
Because they're still the strongest military force. So I would think that, I could see a diminished Orlais, but an Orlais that's completely gone, I don't think that that's going to happen, because at this point, the only forces that could potentially conquer Orlais would be Tevinter, Parvalin, and Fereldan has never really recovered from the Fifth Blight. and then the whole plot of Inquisition.
That's true. I mean, I think if you keep the Inquisition around, they definitely pose a threat.
Yes. And I think that's one of the reasons that Orlais wants the Inquisition under the Chantry's thumb.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You're right. And I don't necessarily think we'll see a totally fallen Orlais. When I said that, I didn't mean like the whole thing. I just mean maybe something that's more fractured. Like you have a section that's like just the Chantry. Like Val Royeaux is the Chantries. Like it's Vatican City. And then you have like part of Orlais that's ruled by the Chevalier, and then like you have another part that's ruled by elves or Fereldan or the Inquisition or whatever. I could see it splitting up into multiple factions more than I could see it just totally falling into like wasteland.
Yeah. And I will say that what you choose as the player for the Orlesian Civil War greatly impacts on like what that might look like, because if you leave Celine on the throne and you exile Gaspard, part of the narration is that Empress Celine continues to rule, but there are many questions among the nobility on if she relies too much on the Inquisition. So already, even though, we win and we provide stability to Orlais, really having the Inquisition side with Celine weakens her political hold.
Well, I don't even think that's true, though. I think that she already is a weak political leader.
Well, yes, that's true. And I mean, Cullen himself even says that. He says that it might be better to go with Gaspard because he's less, manipulated.
I mean, yeah, and I agree with Cullen. Like, the first time I played this game, I was like, oh, no, we're going to go with Celine because, like, Gaspard is mean. He's a bad guy. Like, he seems like a jerk. And he is a jerk. But he's also a strong leader. And I'm not saying that Celine isn't a strong leader, but after reading all these novels, she just has so many issues. Like, she's made a lot of mistakes. And there's a lot of people who don't support her, and I understand it because she wants to make change in Orlais, but, she's nice to Fereldan, and they don't like that, and she's nicer for a while to elves, and they don't like that, and she doesn't support the Chevalier like they want her to, and so they don't like that, and there are just all these things, and then she supports the Inquisition, and some people don't like that, and so it's just she's done a lot of things that a lot of people disagree with, and it doesn't seem to me like she's made a lot of true allies. Mm-hmm. So that's just my perspective, but
yeah. All right. Well, I think that's all for Orlais this time, so we'll take another just little quick break and we'll be back with our character. Okay, welcome back. Well, Shelby, who we got for our character to highlight today?
Yes, so we are talking about someone that we've never met in the games, or the books, or the comics, but she is an important character, and I talked about her earlier. And so today we're talking about Jeshavis, and she's the mother of Orlais. We kind of went back and forth between a lot of different people to highlight this time, just because, like, there are so many people we could have talked about, but I feel like she was an important one because we don't know, like, she's not someone that we talk about a lot, even though she's referred to as the mother of Orlais. So, if you haven't dug into the Codex for anything, you probably won't have even heard of her. But Jeshavis was the first female chieftain of the Syrian tribes. And they're the ones that established Orlais, like we talked about earlier. So, we talked about her story a little bit earlier about her, husband, who was the son of Andraste and Maphrath, uniting the tribes. But I want to talk about the marriage a little bit because I get the feeling that she was not really asked about the marriage. Like, it was more of an arranged marriage, or it was presented to her as like her duty, like something she had to do. Like, this was politically expedient. This was not a love marriage, which totally makes sense because she murders him or has him murdered.
Right.
I feel like she's like, you know that TikTok sound that's like, I may have girl bossed a bit too close to the sun. That's Jeshavis, 100%. That's her, totally. But I think that she gives you what?
She gives me big Lady Macbeth vibes.
Yeah, I see that too. I definitely see that. But I think that she's really interesting because she's so pissed off at Isarath for uniting these tribes that have nothing in common, that are, distinct tribes from one another. But then she leaves them united. Like, she doesn't break them apart. She continues to rule over them. So I very much see that as not necessarily hypocritical, but like, it's different when you're a person who's from that community who does something versus when someone who's an outsider comes in and does something. And I definitely think Isarath, her husband, her first husband, was always seen as an outsider because he's Alamari, he's Fereldan. And that once again goes back to our deep conflict between Orlais and Fereldan. So I think she's an interesting character, again, because she's not a good character. I think a lot of times, not necessarily in BioWare, but just in anything, when we have women characters, women leaders especially, we look at them as if like, oh, you're going to be good. You're going to be a good person because you're a woman, because you're a wife, because you're a mother, for whatever reason. And so I think we automatically trust female leaders a little bit more. And maybe I'm just speaking for myself here, but I always love it when that trope is turned on its head. And I think it very much is with the story of Jeshavis, because she's like violent. She's looking out for number one, and number one is her. Number one is Jeshavis. She's looking out for her own power. She's playing the game before the game even has rules. Before anybody else is playing the game, Jeshavis is playing the game.
Right.
So, I think she's interesting for all of these reasons.
I think it's also another point of like, Andraste is really kind of a woman who decides her own fate, who is this leader and brings everything up to that. And I'm sure at some point, like, as we both know, representation matters. Like, seeing a woman lead and be this inspiration to all these people is likely empowering for other women to lead and take ownership of like that. And then she's martyred and all these men start telling her what to do. So I just kind of see that like, okay, I don't want to do this, so I'll do this my way because, Mama said it was okay.
That's interesting because I definitely see Andraste and Jeshavis almost as like opposites of each other. Like, foils, exactly. That's the word I was looking for. Like, Andraste's the hero, Jeshavis is the anti-hero. Like, she does everything opposite that Andraste does. She betrays her husband before her husband can betray her. Andraste gets betrayed by her husband, right? And so I definitely see a lot of these opposites in these two women. And again, I think it goes back, and I feel like I am a broken record, but I feel like this impacts so much of Orlesian culture, and that's this divide between Fereldan and Orlais. I see Andraste is Fereldan. That's who she is. She's born outside of what will become Denerim, and Jeshavis is clearly so Orlesian. She's playing the game before the game exists. And so, not that these two women had conflict because they didn't know each other. They didn't really live at the same time, but the differences between them really highlight the differences between their culture. And I feel like moving forward into modern history a little bit, we're getting off topic, but I feel like at this point in history, by the time of the Dragon Age, I feel like the histories of Ferelden and Orlais are so intertwined that you almost can't even separate them anymore.
I would definitely agree with that, especially with the whole Inquisition, being housed in Ferelden, but being so involved in Orlais. And they literally sit
on the border
of the Frostback of the Frostback Mountains and everything like that. That's all the time we have today. Thank you for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. Thanks for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. As always, you can find us on Twitter at DA Lorecast. If you have any lore questions, topics to unpack, or side character suggestions, email them to us at dalorecast@gmail.com. The Dragon Age Lorecast is a part of the Robots Radio Rocket Club. You can join the Robots Radio Network Discord by clicking the link in our episode description. If you enjoyed our show, we'd love it if you'd subscribe and give us a review. See you next time.
How well do you know your video game lovers?
Have you ever wondered how your video game bays stack up against all the other delectable digital dates?
I'm Genesis, the girl whose motto in life is love, laugh, tequila. And on Two Girls, One Ship, we analyze, rate, and review all that the world of video game romances has to offer.
And I'm Vervada, the hopeless romantic cat lady and lifelong gamer.
But you should know that our podcast centers on character and romance analysis and doesn't shy away from exploring the fun of physical connection.
Or from the deep emotional connections built between two characters, using specific in-game dialogue and the overall narrative journey. So join the Two Girls, One Ship shipsters, and remember,
beauty is in the eye of the controller.